Are you a player who has really yet to get into PVM in old school RuneScape? It can be intimidating, trust me, but it's never been more accessible. Gone are the days of learning Zulrah as your first boss, or doing KQ and learning nothing but how to eat an inventory of food. Plenty of lower end bosses have been added to the game over the past couple years, but it's not just their abundance or accessibility that make them great alone. It's the fact that they've all been designed in a way to teach you some of the core mechanics of PVM in old school RuneScape that will scale you even to the hardest encounters this game has to offer. What are the core mechanics of PVM in old school RuneScape? There are 3. You have prayer switches, which is pretty self-explanatory, switching between protection prayers in order to mitigate damage. You have gear switches, which is the ability to quickly switch between 1 to 8 pieces of gear so you can effectively do damage, and movement, which is the ability to use the tile system to move your character to a given location while understanding how the true tile system works in this game. Now, there are sub-mechanics like speccing, inventory management, positioning, or a boss's own unique mechanics. However, that's not what we're focusing on here. We're going to focus on the 3 core mechanics. Just by learning these 3 core mechanics, you will understand over 80% of PVM in this game, and the other 20% you can learn as you get more proficient, more experience, and try different bosses. Now that we know these 3 core mechanics, we want to focus on making these better. So we're going to look at PVM encounters that will be good at 1 or 2 of these mechanics. We are going to skip some early or mid-game encounters that teach you nothing. There's no reason to go to the giant mole. It's not going to teach you anything about PVM, but there are other similar bosses that will. I want to mention that this video isn't going to be a guide for every single boss or encounter that I mentioned in this video. I'm simply going to be telling you what places you should go to and why they're great for teaching you some of the core mechanics of PVM. The first boss to discuss should come to no surprise for experienced players. It has been one of the best additions to the game for teaching players some of the mechanics in old school RuneScape, and we have seen this with the World of Warcraft players. This has got to be Scurrius, a boss that you can access in one of the first cities you visit in this game, and it's going to be great to do for anyone who has overhead prayers unlocked. This boss is going to teach you primarily how to prayer switch. You're going to have blue balls for protect mage, green balls for protect range, and you can also switch to protect melee when the small rats spawn to mitigate damage, as well as Scurrius' own melee attacks. So this is fantastic for getting a taste of what prayer switching is in old school RuneScape. On top of that, you're learning a little bit of movement as well. There's going to be shadows on the floor from falling rocks that you need to move away from. This is going to teach you to do that. It's going to teach you that anytime there's a mechanic like this, it's always going to spawn on your feet, which is always incentivizing you to move, and you'll get used to that rhythm of doing that. Now, it's a fairly basic movement thing, so it's not great movement teaching, but it's going to give you at least a little bit of a taste of what movement is in old school RuneScape. So this is going to be the first boss for probably 90% of new players. Highly recommend you come here as soon as you get your overheads, and maybe combat of about 70 plus. The next boss I want to talk about, I've personally explained my criticism towards. However, there is no doubt that it does teach you some core mechanics in this game, and that has got to be Hueycoatl, another boss you can go to pretty much right away with very, very little requirements. This boss is once again going to be very good for teaching you prayer switching. You're going to have blue projectiles for mage, green projectiles for range, and red projectiles for melees, and that's typically the colors of any projectiles in this game when it comes to protection prayers, but there are some differences like Sodaseg where that doesn't happen, but generally this is the pattern they've been going with over the past several years. So very good for prayer switching, and it comes at you very slow, so you have a lot of time to react. The other thing you're going to learn here, and probably a little bit better than Scurrius, is movement. For one, there's going to be lightning spawning at your feet and you'll have to move away, and it's a little bit more crowded than it is with Scurrius, so a little bit more intensive. And then the other thing has to do with its tail attack. When it slams its tail down, there's a wave that comes towards you, and the only way to not take damage from this is to effectively run through it. Now, this is a little bit unintuitive, but it's kind of a core unintended or emergent mechanic of this game. If you're not familiar with how running works, with walking you're moving 1 tile at a time, with running you're moving 2 tiles at a time, but you're not actually going over every tile, you're skipping the tiles, right? You're going 2 tiles at a time. So by doing that, you can run through something because you're effectively never touching it. So this is going to teach you a little bit about that, which definitely happens in other encounters, and it's not strictly for running through things. This could also be if there's like poison splats on the ground, you can actually go over them technically without actually going over them as long as you're skipping by running. So that's going to be a very core part of movement that you'll experience throughout the game, whether it's Yama and running through things or Chambers and running through things, or like poison you're trying to avoid. So definitely recommend Hueycoatl as one of the first bosses you take on when learning these core mechanics. This next boss continues the trend of being very accessible by having basically no requirements other than overheads and some combat levels, and this has got to be Sarachnis. While Sarachnis is an older boss at this point, technically, it still has some value. If you want to spend a little bit of time here, you could skip over this one, but it can be a good intro boss for some people. What you're primarily learning here again is prayer switching. You're switching between melee and range. Now, unlike other bosses where you're reacting to the colors that you're seeing and things coming your way, this one you need to be proactive. And I think this is why it's worth checking him out at least a little bit, because not every type of prayer switch in this game is a reactive prayer switch. There are some that you need to pray ahead of time. So if you're late on it, you'll take the damage. Even if a projectile's coming your way, you'll still take the damage even if you switch to the right prayer after. So Sarachnis, when it moves away from you, you'll have to switch to range, and if you're late on doing that, you're going to take a range hit. When you get back to Sarachnis, you need to protect melee, or you're going to take a melee hit. So I think this is a good boss simply for learning that, and learning that not every single prayer switch is a reactive prayer switch. The last super accessible boss I want to talk about that you can do with basically no requirements has to be the Royal Titans, and this is where you're going to get your first flavor of real gear switching in old school RuneScape. Now, there is some aspects of gear switching with Huey and Scurrius that you can do, but at Royal Titans, this is where you're going to start using like a 4-way switch potentially. So the way this boss works is you typically want to melee them, but they will either move out of range or you'll move out of range, and you'll want to range them instead as their range defense goes down. This means that you definitely want to bring a range switch, and on top of that, you're going to have these adds that spawn where you want to take them out with elemental magic, so you're going to want a magic switch. So you're actually going to be tri-bridding at this boss when you're learning it, which is so cool to see in a boss this early in your journey, and that's a super important thing to get comfortable with when you start to do things later, like raids, where you're commonly tri-bridding. So this is a fantastic boss for learning that. Now you will need a duo partner, so that's one sort of downside, but it does teach you how to work with other players. Highly recommend you go to this boss to learn a little bit more about gear switching. It's also decent for movement as well, because there's aspects of the fight where you'll need to stand in certain locations, or you'll move the adds around so you can easily take them out with magic. Gear switching as a core mechanic is something you don't see a lot of in the early encounters, and that makes translating to 6-way switches and 8-way switches maybe a little bit difficult for some people, because Royal Titans is really the only case here, and it's like 4-way switch max maybe. But there is a pro tip here that I think is something that a lot of newer players can really benefit from, and bear with me here. It's a bit of a Mr. Miyagi wax on approach. What you want to do to get really good at gear switching in old school RuneScape is clean, grimy herbs. Yes, cleaning grimy herbs will get you better at gear switching for a couple of key reasons. Firstly, the muscle memory. Have an inventory of herbs, and don't clean them kind of one at a time, one row at a time. Clean them like you're doing a gear switch. So you're going to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and go across the 2 top rows. I recommend horizontal, but you could do vertical too if you're more comfortable with vertical switching. By doing this pattern, it's going to get you very comfortable with that muscle memory of switching those gear slots, and it will translate to PVM. I did this and got more comfortable with gear switching, so highly recommend building your muscle memory that way. On top of this, it kind of teaches you a little bit about the tick system. You might have noticed when you're switching gear, especially when you're doing 6 and 8-way switches, that you'll switch and kind of your gear goes on in stages rather than as you click them. That's because everything happens in 0.6 second intervals, And when you click on, 8 items in 0.9 seconds, it's going to happen in 2 chunks instead of happening fluidly or happening in 1 tick. That's normal, right? You're not doing anything wrong. It's just the timing of the ticks and whatnot. Very few people, if any, can do an 8-way switch in 0.6 seconds. And even if they could, they'd have to time it at the very beginning of the tick for it to be all 1 tick. So don't worry about that aspect, but cleaning the herbs can kind of show you this timing so you get a little bit more comfortable with how the ticks work as well. So on top of building the muscle memory, you're also getting a little bit more comfortable with the way cycles work in this game. Moving along from that tip here, we're going to start moving into some bosses and encounters that are a little bit more in the mid-game, still very early, but might require you to do a certain quest or something like that, but can still teach you some core mechanics. And the first one I want to talk about is Amoxliatl. This is an unpulled boss that was added, and this is a good boss because it's primarily going to be about teaching you a little bit more about movement. Now, what makes this one a little bit more unique is it's very crowded around you when the ice spawns, and you always need to move 2 tiles away, so you're always running and you're getting very comfortable with that kind of 1 tick 2 tile movement, so that's going to be very good for that. On top of that, there is a situation where your prayer gets turned off. You'll need to turn it back on. I wouldn't consider this learning a core mechanic, but it is a sub mechanic that happens at places like chambers and vorkaths, so getting used to turning your prayer back on is a nice little bonus here. Continuing along the Varlamore thread here, we have the Moons of Peril. This is a great mid-game place a lot of counts are going to go to once they've done a little bit of PVM, but the main thing you're going to learn here is going to be movement stuff. So with every single one of these bosses, there's something movement based within them. With the Eclipse boss, you're trying to stay on the outside of the moon so you don't take damage here, and it's a little bit slower paced, which you'll need to get used to eventually for stuff like the Inferno way down the line, so that's nice there. The Blue Moon boss has tornadoes that you'll need to dodge, and if you do get hit with them, it does turn off your run, so you have to get used to turning your run back on. And then for the Blood Moon boss, you have the blood spots that you'll need to move away from, and that's a mechanic you're going to be pretty comfortable with because you've done some other encounters that are very similar at this point. But the other movement mechanic here is going to be the Cougar mechanic, and this one is very interesting. It teaches you how to step away from the Cougar in a certain rhythm so that you don't take damage, and this is a very important skill to learn when it comes to movement because it's very much a rhythm game, old school RuneScape, and this is going to show you that for sure. Listening to audio cues is going to be very important here, and this actually directly translates to doing Theater of Blood Verzik Part 2, which is actually incredible, and I love that they added that. So Moons of Peril, while you're not doing any prayer switching or really any gear switching other than specking, it does have some pretty key movement tech that you will be learning. The next place I want to talk about actually isn't a boss at all, but is probably the best place for learning movement in old school RuneScape, and that has got to be the Hallowed Sepulchre, particularly if you can do at least floor 3, but ideally 4+, so that's 72 agility or 82 plus agility. That's going to be a little bit of a requirement for some accounts, but once you do have it, I do recommend spending some time here because the amount of movement tech and movement understanding that you're going to get from this place is incredible. So you're going to be dodging projectiles, you're going to be timing when you're clicking along with the ticks. All that's going to be great. I think what really makes it impressive is how you start to grasp how True Tile works in this game. Now, if you don't know how True Tile works, firstly, turn on the plugin True Tile Indicator. You'll see that there's always, when you're running, a tile that's marked 2 tiles in front of your character. Basically, what that means is you're seeing where your character physically is on the client side, but where your character actually is on the server side is that tile that's 2 tiles in front of you. And man, when that understanding clicks, oh man, it makes a huge difference for understanding movement in this game, and it makes you much better at moving. So by doing the Hallowed Sepulchre, it's going to be very clear how impactful True Tile is. You're going to see your character dodging things you didn't think you should be able to dodge based on where your character is, but that's all because of the way movement works in this game. So I highly recommend, if you have the agility levels and you've done Sins of the Father and you want to learn more about movement and it's going to translate to PVM, do the Hallowed Sepulchre, definitely. The last couple examples, once again, they're not bosses, they're actually Slayer creatures, but I think they're great to include because they incorporate all 3 core mechanics at least a little bit. This is going to be Tormented Demons and Demonic Gorillas. I think they're great for gear switching because you're forced to switch your gear. They're good for prayer switching because you have to switch your prayer, and there's a little bit of movement because they both throw things that you'll need to dodge. So definitely recommend spending some time at these places if you want to try a little bit of all 3 mechanics, and you can make some really good money here as well. Those are all the early game to mid game encounters, tips, and bosses that you can do to learn the core mechanics of PVM in old school RuneScape. This should turn you from a noob to a learning decent PVMer, definitely. And at this point, I definitely recommend, if you've gotten comfortable with these mechanics, that you move to things that incorporate all 3. Stuff like Tombs of a Masket should be your next goal, or perhaps trying out the Gauntlet and Corrupted Gauntlet, which will take those skills to the next level.